Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to a happy new year, right? It's now 2023. We're recording this right now on January 1st, right? New Year's Day. So we can go ahead and get this thing up there so you'll have plenty of time to do it, right? And I'm going to keep sticking to that commitment that I made to y'all before we left for school. We're going to keep this bad boy under 25 minutes, right? And so, of course, where are we picking up? Right where we left off. When we're talking about the French Revolution, right? We're talking about the French Revolution, and on our last exam and in our last test, we were talking a lot about the prelude to the French Revolution, right? We just really, truly started the French Revolution when we actually left for break, right? We talked about that very storied event, the storming of the Bastille, that technically begins the revolutionary process. Now, you could make the argument that the tennis court oath is the very beginning of the French Revolution. However, July 14th, 1789, when the Bastille was stormed, that's when it actually begins the violent, well, not completely violent phase, because we'll talk about the different phases here in a second, but it is going to begin the more like process of the revolution when you think of things like Boston Tea Party, American Revolutionary War, Bunker Hill, those types of events where direct action in the revolution is being taken place, right? Because the tennis court oath was, of course, done at the Estates General, where they were hoping to save the monarchy of France and save the ways of France and try to prevent a revolution from happening in totality. But of course, as we know, the Estates General failed, right? The Estates General failed because the financial crisis in France was too bad, the famines were too bad, the agricultural situation was too bad, the losing of many wars was too bad, the desacralization of the monarchy was way too bad, and the ancient regime was just crumbling and falling apart and had no place else to go. Big thing I'm going to ask you to do, okay? Big thing I'm going to ask you to do going into this next unit, going into this new semester, is go ahead and study all that stuff about the French Revolution, because not our first class back, but our next class back, we're going to have a quiz on just everything French Revolution lead up to this flip and a little bit of stuff in class, okay? We're doing that mainly just so we can get off to a good start, hit the ground running, and y'all, we only got a few months, and then boom, AP test time is here, right? But look, we're in 1789. We need to get to like 1989. It's not even that difficult. It's not even that far away. In the grand scheme of things, you know what I'm talking about? We got a couple hundred years, and we've already covered, in the last quarter, we covered 350, right? So we can do this. You all are doing great. Keep up the hard work. But a little bit of a review, right? The Bastille was not heavily guarded, right? Like, as something we need to understand is that, like, the French Revolution and the storming of the Bastille, when it truly happens and begins on July 14th, 1789, it's all going to be kind of like becoming a haphazard kind of thing. It was never intended to go down this way, right? But the Bastille, of course, wasn't being heavily guarded. There was only about 80 guards there in total. Most of them were retired French military, and then some of them were Swiss mercenaries, right? So the thing about it wasn't heavily fortified. 900 Parisians are going to show up out front of the Bastille, and the series of events is going to lead to Parisians ripping down a set of gates, right? Actually, a giant drawbridge that was out front of it. And that drawbridge, apparently, when it actually fell, when they ripped it down and saw it through the chains and it actually fell down, it actually crushed one of the rioters and stuff like that. Can you imagine being that guy looking up and be like, oh no, it just splat. Now the big thing about it, though, is they storm into the central courtyard, they begin negotiations with the warden and stuff like that, but they get inside of the Bastille looking for that all-important barrels of gunpowder, right? Now, as we remember, or as we should remember, this whole event was actually preceded by this thing called the storming of the Hotel de la Invalides, right? The Hotel Invalides is the place where, like, all those retired military people actually came from. It's where in the modern era Napoleon Bonaparte's grave is. And, like, by the way, Napoleon is alive at this time. When all this stuff is going down, Napoleon is very, very much alive, right? He's actually in military school at this point. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is that they went to the Hotel de Invalides and they got guns, right? The rioters had a ton of guns and stuff like that. They knew the Estates General was failing. They heard that Necker might actually get dismissed and stuff like that, and all the popular pamphlets were running around saying, like, look, we ain't got much time. It's about to be a revolution, right? So they grabbed all those guns, and then they wanted to go to the Bastille to try and get a hold of some of those barrels of gunpowder, right? Because otherwise, you just have some big fancy clubs, right? So now the thing about it, though, is that the revolution had started when they got inside that Bastille, when they killed several of the guards, when they decapitated the warden and his assistant and put their heads on sticks and began to parade around the streets of Paris with them, right? The revolution has now started. And in this whole process, Necker would be reinstated as the financial advisor of France. Lafayette would be made leader of the new National Guard as well, right? So, of course, the Marquis de Lafayette, Gilbert de Lafayette, is going to be the guy that comes into power and leads this new provisional militia, right? A big thing about the American Revolution that we need to remember is how it inspired the French, both financially inspired them because it took all their money away, and also ideologically inspired them and stuff like that, that Lafayette, when he comes to power, is going to be creating militias, much like seen in the United States military when they fought off the British, right? And so he becomes the new leader of the National Guard, right? And he is beginning to lead this population of France following that major event when the Bastille itself was burned down to the ground, right? And now a big thing to understand about the burning of the Bastille and the storming of the Bastille and stuff like that in general is you also have to understand is not only is this a physical act of the destruction of property that belongs to the monarchy and the taking down of a thing that stood as a giant symbol of like oppression and stuff like that. That's what I'm getting at, is it's an ideological event as well. You just tore down a medieval fortress that was used to protect certain things and also keep people locked up inside, because remember, it had been transformed into a prison. And so only about 7 prisoners were there at the time. But Voltaire himself was locked up inside the Bastille at one point for rigging the lottery and also for not being allowed to have his freedom of speech and speaking out against the nobility of France, right? So it's a big thing. It's like not only is this a physical destruction of property, it's an ideological destruction of property as well, because it's taking down the old ways, right? And it's also got massive popular support at this point because many Parisians are storming into the streets and they're actually believing that their rights can be met and that the revolution can go forward. Vive la révolution. All right, so now look, the big thing that you need to understand, oh wait, by the way, back there, that's a really important little picture. That's the warden and his assistant's heads on the pikes that they began to actually like walk through the streets of, walk through the streets of Paris with and stuff like that. But we're in it now. We're in it now. We are here now. We are all up in this thing. We are now involved in what you know as the French Revolution, right? And it is, of course, going to have several different phases. Something that you need to understand, key differences between the French Revolution and the American Revolution, is that the American Revolution was much quicker, all right? So it was much faster in the grand scheme of like timeline, in the grand scheme of reprisals and authority shifts and things like that. It was pretty much over and done with much faster than the actual French Revolution was, and that's what the French wanted, but it's just not going to play out that way, right? So the American Revolution lasted from 1776 to 1783, okay? Now the French Revolution, on the other hand, is going to last from 1789 to 1815, right? We're talking about, what is that, 20... Yeah, 10, yeah, like that's almost like 26 years, right? 26 years, whereas the American Revolution didn't even last a full 10, right? So now looking at the entire thing, though, there are 4 phases of the French Revolution, much like there was 4 phases of the 30 Years' War, right? Now looking at this whole thing, we got 1789 to 1791, which is the very all-important phase that we're entering into right now. It is known as the National Assembly phase or the Liberal phase. I 9 times out of 10 call it the Liberal phase because it's all about being progressive, changing things and reacting to violent events, right? Then we have from 1792 to 1794 this thing known as the Radical phase. Now the Radical phase, I need you to do me a favor. You need to write that Radical phase word in like red to symbolize blood, and you need to make it look like it's like chaotic and look like it's exploding and skulls and blah, because there's gonna be a lot of people that die during that phase, and most of them are actually French people themselves being killed by other French people. It's this thing during this, it's a moment in time known as the Reign of Terror will actually start then, and like all of France is going to be held, the power of France will be held by a handful of very radical individuals, hence the Radical phase, right? Then we've got 1795 to 1799, the most boring phase of the French Revolution, known as the Directory phase, and we will spend all of about 1 slide talking about that thing, because it's just kind of dull. It was like a Band-Aid, right? It was like a Band-Aid after the Radical phase, and they were like, look, this will work, and it didn't work, and then, of course, you have, last but not least, from 1800, or 1799 technically, but the end of 1799, to 1815, you have the Napoleonic phase, aka the time when Napoleon Bonaparte came to power and led France in a giant takeover of most of the continent of Europe, okay? So going forward, though, make sure you have easy access to those phases. They're going to be very important on that quiz, and also very important to your understanding of it going through the major events of the French Revolution and stuff like that. So getting into it a little bit, though, now we're moving into that liberal phase, right? That very all-important National Assembly / liberal phase. Now, here's the big thing that you need to understand about the liberal phase in general, okay? So the liberal phase of the French Revolution is going to be massively important because it all hinges on the idea of a representative body, aka the National Assembly, reacting immediately to when an event happens and trying to fix it and trying to rectify old problems that existed in the French monarchy, right? Or in the French, what are we talking about here? They're not a republic yet, so like in the French Empire, or like just in France, okay? They're just trying to fix things and get rid of the old ways of France, right? They're basically it's the National Assembly when they sat there at the tennis court oath and they promised to never disband until their demands were met. They're going to start getting their demands, right? And a lot of it comes off the heels of events that would occur, right? So basically, this is how the National Assembly phase or the liberal phase works. a thing would occur that would be violent or traumatic, and then here comes the National Assembly to fix it really, really quickly, right? They're going to be like, thing happens, we're going to fix it. Thing happens, we're going to fix it. Thing happens, we're going to fix it, right? So, like, the big thing that you need to understand is this is the best phase of the French Revolution. It's the most kind of, like, tactile one. It's the one where things are going down, and it's one where the poor and the populace of France are getting the demands that they always wanted met, right? So, two big things are going to happen that really symbolize these things, and ironically enough, on this title, they are out of order. It actually should say the Great Fear of the August Decrees, but, you know, it is what it is. So, the thing about it, though, is there's a very famous quote that kind of symbolizes the growth of the liberal phase and also of the National Assembly phase of the French Revolution. Hello. Good talk. So anyway now, so really, really quick though, the thing about it is you've got the August Decrees and the Great Fear. Well, the Great Fear is going to be symbolized by a lot of radical, or not radical, excuse me, I'm not going to try to confuse you too much, a lot of extreme aggressive actions by poor people, especially the peasantry class of France, right? So there's a famous little quote that kind of really defines what's going on with the liberal phase as well, and apparently one day, Louis, one of his advisors, came up to him and told him about the storming of the Bastille, and Louis had already heard about it. And Louis said, "Is it a riot?" And then his assistant said, "No, sir. It's a revolution," right? So the biggest thing that you need to understand is even Louis knows this is going on. Even Louis is aware of a revolution is occurring, but remember where he is. He's all the way out in Versailles. He's 13 miles outside of Paris. He's not being affected like it is in everybody else, right? But the thing about it is the storming of the Bastille did start in Paris, but the revolution is going to begin to radiate out, really radiate out of Paris and begin to affect the countryside and also different areas outside of the city of Paris, right? Now, the Great Fear is a major, major event that went down while Louis is hiding out in Versailles. Rioting is going to break out, okay? So the countryside is going to see its first uproar of riots and also of insurrectionist-type movements, okay? Rioting in the countryside is occurring because a lot of these poor people and a lot of the peasantry class that are former serfs that are now day laborers, indentured servants, and also just kind of like peasantry, poor peasant farmers and stuff are fearing or getting very afraid of noble reprisal. Now, what reprisal means is that nobles showing up with small armies, kind of like the German Peasants' Rebellion under Martin Luther. Remember that whole thing when 100,000 peasants were killed and destroyed by the noble armies and stuff like that? Well, that's what all these people are living in fear of, right? So the peasants are flipping out, and they're very, very afraid that the nobles are going to come back with full force and destroy all the things that they're trying to get done, right? And so this is known as the Great Fear. What they're going to do is the poor are going to begin to burn feudal contracts or versions of them that were left, because as we know, feudalism didn't really exist the way that you think it does anymore, but there still were a lot of feudal contracts in the sense of indentured servitude contracts, things that said that they had to live on this countryside or in this area for a certain amount of time, right? So they're burning those contracts, trying to show that they are released from this land. They took back common lands. They went after enclosures and destroyed enclosures and said, no, we're going back to the old way of farming when we shared everything and stuff like that, which is pretty crazy because I remember we had to talk about this, Addie Stein, right, in class where we were just sitting there chatting about like, well, who owned that land? Well, the thing was nobody, and the poor are saying that they're taking it back, right? The Great Fear is a very traumatic thing going down. You can see it in this picture as well, where they're burning carriages, killing horses, killing some nobles, taking their possessions, rioting in the streets, and really, really coming down and burning noble homes and things like that, okay? Apparently there were reports of burning noble homes with nobles inside of them while they slept and stuff like that. So the Great Fear is a very chaotic moment in history, okay? The big thing about it, though, also, is that we have to understand that, shout out Mr. Roddy, is that apparently there might have been an issue of ergot poisoning going on at this exact same time as well. People eating moldy bread and stuff like that, they might have actually been hallucinating and feeling the same similar effects that one would feel if they were to do acid or LSD, right? So there's a very good chance that they were just burning stuff and being like, wow, that's pretty. But also, it's a big thing as well that the Great Fear was a very real event. Feudal contracts are being burned, things are being raided, and the poor are basically taking back things from the nobles that live out in the countryside. Well, here's the big thing about why this is a big key liberal event. Because in response to the Great Fear, to quell the violence and keep the revolution under control, the National Assembly is going to pass these series of acts known as the August Decrees, also known as, famously, the night of August the 4th, okay? So in this process, when these riots began to break out in August, now keep this in the back of your mind, July 14th, 1789, the Bastille is stormed, early August, the Great Fear begins. These first few months of the French Revolution are going to be some of the most important months of this entire event because things are happening so quickly, right? As we know, this typically happens when new things that blow up or new events go down in history is A lot of stuff happening early on, and then we'll hit some periods of lull, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is the August decrees come out, aka the night of August the 4th, where the National Assembly tries to come in and do the liberal thing, and they try to fix everything, right? The night of August the 4th was tried to prevent complete chaos. The biggest thing they wanted to do is the National Assembly began to outlaw things that they believed led to the Great Fear, right? They outlawed feudal dues. They outlawed forced labor. They outlawed the tithe, the forced tax of the church. They also stripped church lands. They did all kinds of stuff, okay? Basically, effectively, in one night, the National Assembly ended feudalism. And write that down, permanently abolished feudalism in 1789 in France. On August 4th, 1789 in France, feudalism was outlawed, right? And basically, effectively as well, in the same evening, the ancient regime was destroyed, right? Like, so the idea that they've now come up with is that the National Assembly is like, look, no more is this, like, nobility above you. No more is this idea of the feudal serf working for them for their whole life and the children being owned by a lord outright. No more is this happening. The ancient regime is dead. The estates are dead. And also, feudalism is gone as well. So Louis is still the king, but now everyone is considered to be more equal, in a sense. Now, at the August decrees, another big event is going to start going down. And they are going to actually call up a very famous figure, right? A man by the name of Thomas Jefferson. And they invite him to come to France. And Marquis de Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson begin working on a document in August, right after they outlawed feudalism. And that document is going to change the trajectory of French history forever, as well as change the trajectory of European history forever. And the document that these two individuals co-wrote with one another is known as, first of all, it came out August 27th, 1789, and it is known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. I swear on everything holy, I love the name of this document. Like, the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It sounds like a heavy metal album that Mr. Roddy would definitely play accompaniment on his ukulele. You know what I'm talking about? Like, so the big thing about it is it sounds like such a cool document, but then and of the Citizen comes in and it just kind of ruins it for me. So if you always need to remember, it's just the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Like, so like you could totally call it that all you want to, but it is also known as the Dormock or the Dorm, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. But the document is still very, very important, okay? The document comes out written in part by Thomas Jefferson and Marquis de Lafayette, and it actually symbolizes and embolizes a lot of the same values that are actually put forward in the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights. What it is it is a document that includes a preamble and that it begins to lay out all of the Enlightenment-inspired ideas and rights that every single person is entitled to in this entire new French area, right? So, like, now that the ancient regime is dead, this document is meant to come along and tell every single person the rights that they are entitled to, the rights that they were born with, and the rights of which they deserve, right? Now, the thing about it is we do have an ideological split in this thing, okay? You got a little bit of a difference between this document and you have a difference of the document in the United States of America, right? Well, a lot of that is because the document in the United States, or like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the United States of America, which outline the government and then also set up the rights of the people in the United States, are going to be written primarily by Jefferson and the Founding Fathers of the United States, and they're going to have the same kind of ideological ideas in them, right? The ideas of life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Direct Enlightenment-inspired ideas, but most of these ideas are going to be pulled from John Locke, Baron de Montesquieu, an anti-Hobbesian view of a monarchy, right? Now, the thing about it, when we look at it, though, is France is a little bit different, okay? France is going to also have some other Enlightenment thinker ideas that came in a little bit later, during and after the American Revolution, and Rousseau's ideas are going to make their way into this document. Louis now in this document is going to be known as the King of the French, rather than being known as the King of France. Now, this is really, really important because it's basically setting him up as a monarchy that will be a monarch over the people, not over the lands and the property that the people therein by own, right? So this is a really big moment. Also, it's an ideological split as well because Jefferson would have gotten rid of this monarch, whereas they never actually did. Louis is still considered the king, and it laid down the new rights under the new regime of France. And one of the three biggest things that you are now allowed to have is freedom of speech, freedom of property, and another big one is the general will, okay? I need you to write that down somewhere on this note, is that in this document, the ideas of the general will are outlined, right? And the ideas of Rousseau coming in and volleying for direct democracy and a representative body of people that will directly dictate law and order is going to be coming into play. Now, it's very important that we understand that the general will can get kind of crazy a little bit at times, because at one point, the general will kind of always says, well, the majority rules. Well, sometimes the majority is really stupid and violent and aggressive and angry, kind of like looking into the fascist regimes of the 1940s in Europe, and then also looking at the reign of terror, which is coming down the pipe, because a lot of people supported it at that time, but now we look back on it and we're like, that's a borderline genocide, right? So the thing about it, though, in general, is that we're seeing something happening right now, and power is being split and changed dramatically in France, right? So in this essence, like, we're looking at, like, the ideas of France, and we now have three groups of people that are beginning to pop up. Now, these groups of people believe in three different specific areas. You got conservatives, which are people like Louis and the nobles and monarchs in general. Classical liberals, which are more like Thomas Jefferson, and then you've got proto-socialists, which is like Rousseau, right? So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to basically just take 2 seconds to discuss, where does power belong according to each of these individuals, right? And why is this document so important is because it's setting up that power dynamic. Well, the thing about it is I couldn't find any other good little emoji for power other than this rainbow that I found on Prezi. So just to show you, in the long run, conservatives, like Louis, believe that the power should still lie in the ruling class, in the nobles, and in the wealthy of France. Whereas classical liberals, like Thomas Jefferson, believe it should be a split power between upper class citizens, the bourgeois, and the rest of the people as well. Something right smack in the middle, more dictated by business and economics, and also of less of feudal rights and things like that, somewhere in the middle. Whereas the socialists, or proto-socialists, like Rousseau, believe that power should lie completely in the hands of the people with direct democracy aspects, right? Now, we will discuss this more, and we will review this concept heavily when we come back from break, okay? Because you need to know conservatives, classical liberals, and socialists are coming down the pipe, and they are going to really blow up right after Napoleon gets big, okay? Now, we got one more event to talk about a little bit before I let you go, okay? And we got to talk about a couple of things that are going on, right? So we just said, like, we just covered a lot of stuff, first of all, right? We just talked about, we reviewed the storming the Bastille. We talked a lot about the causes of the French Revolution, the failure of the Estates General, different things like that. The other big thing we talked about as well just now is we talked about the Great Fear, the night of August the 4th. The liberal phase is beginning, as opposed to the radical, the Directory, and the Napoleonic phase that will come later on, right? We're talking about a bunch of big stuff, and all of these things are happening within the first few months of the revolution, right? Well, the thing you need to understand is that there are some people involved with this revolution that are kind of low on the totem pole right now, but will begin to rise up that totem pole and move their way up in history and also of importance in this revolution. And I want to go ahead and throw 2 of them out there to you, so you know that these guys are in the background this whole time, looking for their chance to come to power, looking for their chance to rise up, right? And one of them is a young man who was kind of seen as a minor political player early on, but his name is Maximilian Robespierre, okay? Now, I'm going to spell that for you real quick. Maximilian is pretty easy to spell. It's Maximillian. Now, Robespierre is his last name, and he's very, very important. Robespierre. He is a bourgeois member. He is a member of the National Assembly at this point. He is beginning to kind of be radicalized by the ideas of Rousseau, and he is also beginning to resent and hate the monarchy and the nobility. Now, the thing that you need to understand about him is this man will rise up and lead one of the biggest eras of bloodshed later on in the French Revolution, but early on he was an active member of the liberal phase. He helped document and create the August Decrees. He was a full supporter of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. One of the biggest things about Maximilian Robespierre that you need to know, and you probably need to write this event down somewhere in your notes real quick, is that he was violently upset and very mad when he found out that Louis had not signed the Declaration of the Rights of Man yet. That's right, when this document came out on August 27th, Louis was still in Versailles, and he refused to sign it or ratify it. This is going to anger Maximilian Robespierre, helping lead to his entire disgust of the nobility as well later on. Then you got this guy, the man who literally emerged from the sewers. I'm not kidding when I tell you this. This man crawled out of a sewer when the revolution began. But let's go ahead and give him a name. His name is Jean, Jean, Paul, Paul, Marat, Marat. Jean-Paul Marat, who was a newspaper writer. and he was living in the sewers of Paris, getting a skin disease and having to soak in a medical bath for hours a day because of this disgusting skin disease he got from being around human waste. But why is this man living in a sewer and being a newspaper writer? Well, the reason why is he's one of the men that wrote those inflammatory pamphlets about Marie Antoinette. He wrote aggressive articles about the monarchy and about the nobility and distributed them amongst the people of Paris. And this right here is his very, very famous newspaper that he wrote, La Amie du Peuple, which is very French for friend of the people, right? And in these different articles, he would discuss major events that would actually catalyze and inspire events going forward. And right now I'm reaching my time limit, so I need to go ahead and let you go. But really, really quickly, it's January 1st. A big moment is happening today. It is New Year's Day, and it is when the Eagles are going to take on the New Orleans Saints. So I'm just here to say, go Birds. See y'all soon.